Welcome back. Your intuition was right all along. You finally noticed it. A small detail that helped everything fall into place. The moment when confusion began to fade and understanding quietly took its place. Deep down, you sensed something was off, even when you tried to dismiss it. Now, as you look back, patterns become clearer, pieces connect. What once felt scattered starts to make sense. You weren't imagining things, you were paying attention. While others moved on quickly or overlooked details, you remembered. You observed, you reflected, and gradually a fuller picture emerged, one that went beyond the surface explanation you were given. Belinda, for a long time, you questioned yourself. You wondered if you were overreacting, if your instincts were unreliable, if your concerns were misplaced. You were told that your reactions were the issue, that your questions meant something was wrong with you. But what went unnoticed was how carefully you were listening. You noticed changes in behavior, shifts in tone, and stories that didn't always line up. You sensed when conversations felt rehearsed, or when responses didn't quite ring true. What some dismissed as overthinking was simply awareness, developing over time. Slammed. You began to realize that not everyone understood the situation the same way you did. Some conversations happened without your input. Decisions were made that you weren't aware of at the time. People formed opinions based on partial information, misunderstandings, or assumptions. When you set boundaries, it was sometimes misinterpreted. When you spoke honestly, your words didn't always land as you intended. Gradually, a version of events took shape that didn't fully reflect your experience. Dean, what made it difficult was how subtle it all was. Small moments, quiet conversations, minor details that didn't seem important on their own, but felt different when viewed together. You started paying closer attention. You remembered what was said and when. You noticed inconsistencies, not to prove anyone wrong, but to understand what was actually happening. Over time, those observations formed a clearer timeline, one that helped you trust your own perspective again. There came a moment when everything felt overwhelming. It seemed like several things shifted at once, leaving you confused and unsure how to respond. Looking back, you can see that people had already formed conclusions before that moment arrived. By the time you tried to explain yourself, many opinions were already set. Your words were filtered through expectations rather than heard with curiosity. That experience changed how you approached things. You became more intentional. You started keeping records, saving messages, and paying attention to timelines, not out of anger, but out of a desire for clarity. And as you did, the situation became easier to understand. Some statements didn't align with past conversations. Certain explanations didn't match the sequence of events. What once felt chaotic began to look more like a series of choices and miscommunications rather than random confusion. Jen, through all of this, one thing became clear. Your awareness grew. You learned to trust your observations without jumping to conclusions. You found grounding in facts, reflection, and perspective. And in doing so, you reclaimed your sense of clarity. Not to relive the past, but to move forward with a stronger understanding of yourself and your experiences. Plines. They believed you would break down, withdraw, or destroy yourself trying to defend against something you could not prove. What they failed to understand is that pain can sharpen awareness. Betrayal forces clarity. Trauma turns attention inward and outward at the same time. You became observant in ways they never expected. You connected details they assumed would stay hidden. Every lie required more lies to protect it, and eventually the contradictions became too many to manage. They forgot which version they told. They left traces they could not erase, and you gathered all of it. Looking back, the signs are clear now. The conversations that stopped when you entered a room. The plans that changed without explanation. The invitations that quietly disappeared. None of it was accidental. There were deliberate efforts to exclude you, to confuse you, to make you doubt your own perception. They even developed ways to talk about you indirectly, signals and phrases meant to keep you unaware. What you sensed was real. It was never imagination, it was structure, and you saw through it. While you spent nights questioning yourself and replaying every interaction, they were refining a system meant to control the narrative. But the truth does not disappear just because it is hidden. It waits. And now you see it clearly, not as fragments, but as a complete picture. Every hour you spent lying awake, replaying conversations and questioning yourself, was an hour they were moving forward with their own intentions. While you were trying to understand, repair, or keep the peace, they were already deciding how they wanted things to unfold. Much of what happened wasn't as spontaneous as it appeared. Patterns formed. Responses felt rehearsed. You weren't trying to compete with anyone, but the situation slowly turned into something adversarial without your consent. Your real mistake wasn't malice or wrongdoing. It was being open. You spoke honestly, showed up as yourself, and didn't instinctively play by unspoken social rules. That unsettled people who relied on appearances and indirect control. Because sincerity has a way of exposing what's carefully hidden. What developed went beyond casual misunderstandings or simple gossip. Conversations happened privately where impressions were shaped and reinforced. Messages were exchanged not just to communicate, but to interpret, analyze, and frame situations in a certain light. Your words and reactions were limbic. People paid close attention to how you responded, what affected you, and when you pulled back. Over time, an unusual amount of focus was placed on your behavior as if it needed to be managed rather than understood. Small actions were discussed, evaluated, and adjusted. Moments where you showed emotion were taken as confirmation of assumptions. Moments of self-doubt were quietly treated as validation. Eventually, others became involved. Not all of them intended harm, but many were given incomplete information. Stories were simplified, details were omitted, and context was lost. You were described in ways that made concern seem reasonable, and caution seem justified. Because the narrative was delivered calmly and confidently, it was rarely questioned. Those individuals repeated what they were told, believing they were being helpful. Meanwhile, the people who shaped the narrative stayed at a distance, allowing impressions to spread without directly confronting you. Influence operated subtly, often disguised as care or neutrality. Over time, this dynamic extended into digital spaces. What began as quiet conversations showed up online in indirect ways. New accounts appeared. Messages arrived without clarity. It felt oddly timed. Systems meant for safety or organization were sometimes used in ways that felt restrictive rather than protective. Content was shared, interpreted, and reshaped without your input. Pieces of your life appeared out of context. Some actions were framed as curiosity or concern, but they created a sense of being observed while being told nothing was happening. The effect wasn't just external. It slowly influenced how you questioned your own perception. They understood how online platforms functioned and used that knowledge carefully. Timing, visibility, and engagement weren't random. Posts appeared when they would be noticed. Language was chosen deliberately. Patterns emerged that made you feel excluded or minimized. What looked coincidental carried intention. Engagement was watched, reactions were noted, and yet, outwardly, everything was presented as accidental or misunderstood. It wasn't chaos. It was structure that stayed just subtle enough to deny. And You remember how quickly responses would surface after you shared something ordinary. The tone felt similar. The timing felt coordinated. That's because people were already aligned. Expectations had been set, language had been mirrored. The goal wasn't necessarily to attack, but to discourage, to make you pause before speaking, to make you second-guess expression, to slowly reduce your presence without ever directly asking you to leave. Land. But prolonged discomfort brings clarity. Instead of shutting down, you became more attentive. You started noticing small inconsistencies. You paid attention to what lingered and what disappeared. Messages that didn't fully align. Timelines that felt too precise. Statements that shifted depending on context. Records preserved details that people assumed would be forgotten. As you compared information, another layer of understanding emerged, one that relied less on emotion and more on observation. Even practical matters weren't immune. Finances became complicated in subtle ways. Support came with quiet expectations. Resources felt conditional. Opportunities faded without clear explanation. What was presented as help sometimes limited independence. What was framed as normal didn't always feel fair. Slowly, you realized that control doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it looks organized, polite, and difficult to challenge. They made sure you struggled, then pointed to the struggle as evidence of your failure. They told others you were irresponsible while actively undermining your stability. Scarcity wasn't accidental. It was arranged. The goal was to keep you dependent, uncertain, and discredited. But you endured. You adapted. You began to recognize the structure beneath the confusion. Once you saw it as a system rather than bad luck, its power started to weaken. Bland, their influence depended on you, not understanding what was happening. The moment clarity arrived, everything shifted. You stopped reacting emotionally and started preserving facts. You stopped explaining yourself and started keeping records. You turned observation into protection. What remains now is proof. Messages, timelines, contradictions, and records that tell a story they never intended to be visible. They believed they were erasing you, but instead, they documented themselves. Beneath every moment that felt like misfortune was a pattern too consistent to deny. What happened to you was not random. It was deliberate, and once seen clearly, it cannot be unseen. Leaned. The sudden bills, the unexpected expenses, and the opportunities that vanished without explanation were not random events. They appeared at the exact moments when you were becoming stronger and more independent. Each time you began to gain stability, something happened that pulled you backward. Whenever you started to build momentum, chaos followed close behind. This pattern was too consistent to dismiss as bad luck. It was interference made to look like circumstance. A silent conflict played out through accounts, payments, and credit records. They understood precisely how to apply pressure without leaving obvious fingerprints. They guided your financial decisions in ways that benefited them, using trust and emotional obligation as leverage. Wanting control over your own money was framed as selfishness. Declining their involvement was labeled as ingratitude. Protecting yourself was twisted into suspicion, and independence was treated as betrayal. Every attempt you made to stand on your own was quietly punished. At the same time, they were keeping records. Messages, transactions, and conversations were saved and selectively presented to create a story where you appeared careless or unstable. The disorder they created became the proof they later used against you. The timing revealed everything. Your largest financial setbacks always arrived when you were closest to freedom. A payment failed, an account overdrafted, an expense appeared without warning, a project collapsed for no clear reason. When you tried to question it, The blame was redirected back onto you. You were told you were forgetful, irresponsible, unlucky. They created dependence and then shamed you for needing help. Their control was not only about, it was about limiting your ability to live freely and make choices without fear. Blam. When financial control began to slip, their focus shifted. They turned their attention to your body and your health. If they could not manage your resources, they would manage your energy. Slowly, they undermined your trust in your own physical experience. Your exhaustion was dismissed as laziness. Your pain was minimized or mocked. Your illness was framed as exaggeration. Real suffering was turned into evidence against you. They learned how to use your health struggles as tools for sympathy, influence, and dominance. The stress they caused became ongoing, feeding itself. Prolonged psychological pressure does not remain in the mind alone. It spreads into the body. Constant alertness, unrelenting anxiety, and the inability to rest change how the nervous system functions. They understood that keeping you anxious made you weaker. They disrupted your recovery when you needed calm. They introduced conflict when your body needed rest. Stress triggered flare-ups, sleepless nights, and physical decline, which they then used as justification to question your reliability. Every symptom had a cause, and that cause was the environment they maintained around you. Inflammation, headaches, digestive problems, panic, fatigue, none of it appeared in isolation. Your nervous system adapted to constant threat, and they treated the damage as proof of your instability. In some cases, they even influenced how others perceived your health. Medical professionals seemed doubtful without clear reason. Private details about your condition appeared in conversations where they did not belong. These were not accidents. Information you shared in trust was passed along under the guise of concern, shaping a narrative that painted you as fragile and unreliable. Your suffering was never treated as something to heal. It was something to manage and exploit. When you were in pain, they complained about inconvenience. When you were bedridden or hospitalized, the focus shifted to how difficult it was for them. Your crisis became their performance. Each setback was used to justify further control. Every attempt you made to recover was met with new stress, new doubt, and new obstacles until exhaustion itself became a cage. The damage was not imagined, it was documented. Medical records reflect the decline clearly. When you place the timeline beside their actions, the connection becomes undeniable. Each escalation in manipulation coincided with deterioration in your health. Langed. What emerges when all the evidence is laid out is a clear pattern. Financial disruption, emotional pressure, and physical decline are not separate stories. They intersect. Records, dates, messages, and reports all point back to the same source. This was not chance, it was not misfortune. It was engineered. Every crisis followed design. Every setback served a purpose. Every symptom was exploited. Their sense of power was built on your suffering, and in the process, they left proof behind. And when children were involved, the harm reached an even darker level. Control extended beyond you, reaching into innocence itself, shaping young minds where safety and trust should have existed. Maligned. They worked on shaping perception before anyone ever had the chance to form their own understanding. The stories they told were carefully designed to sound protective, while doing the most damage. You were described as someone who didn't care, someone who walked away, someone who posed a risk, all under the claim that they were keeping others safe. They involved children because they knew you would hesitate to defend yourself if it meant risking harm to them. Family became the setting for manipulation, and parenthood was turned into a weapon. Every interaction became a test. Every visit felt like an interrogation, and every word you spoke was twisted into something threatening. Your love was reframed as control, your compassion as weakness, your concern as guilt. While you fought to stay present and involved, children were told you didn't care. While you were pushed away and locked out, they were told you chose to leave. While you struggled to hold everything together, they were told you were unstable. Blend, children believed what they were taught because they had no reason not to. When multiple adults repeat the same story, it becomes reality in a child's mind. Now there are young people who carry resentment toward you for things you never did, not because of your actions, but because of the narrative that surrounded them from the beginning. History was rewritten and repeated until it hardened. The people behind it understood exactly what they were doing. They knew that if they shaped a child's view early enough, the distance would last for decades. Those ideas would become part of how the children understood the world, passed down and reinforced until questioning them felt impossible. That is how long-term damage is created, not by one moment, but by repetition that never allows the wound to close. You likely noticed the signs. Children repeating phrases they could not have come up with on their own. Conversations that sounded rehearsed. Words that mirrored adult language too closely to be natural. You heard them say things they had clearly been coached to believe, and it broke you, not only because you were losing connection, but because you could see what it was doing to them. They were being pulled into a conflict they did not start, and made to carry emotional weight that was never theirs. The cruelty was not only in how they treated you, but in their willingness to damage innocence to maintain control. Bland. The campaign did not stop with family. It extended into your work and your stability. They studied your professional life with the same attention they gave your emotions. They learned who trusted you, which relationships mattered, which opportunities could change your future. Then, quietly and carefully, they interfered. Doubts were planted in the right places. Concerns were whispered to the right people. You were framed as unreliable or difficult without anyone ever saying it outright. Doors closed before you reached them. Opportunities disappeared without explanation. It wasn't obvious enough to point to, but it was consistent enough to hurt. Complaints were made anonymously. Emails were sent under the pretense of care. Conversations happened in private, framed as professional caution. There was always just enough distance that exposing it made you look unreasonable. Planes. They relied on your integrity to keep you quiet. They knew you wouldn't retaliate recklessly or publicly defend yourself in ways that could harm your reputation. While you tried to stay professional, they slowly poisoned the environment around you. When projects fell apart or collaborations ended suddenly, you blamed yourself. You questioned your ability, your personality, your value. But it was never about competence. You weren't failing, you were threatening. You saw too clearly. You asked the wrong questions. You couldn't be controlled, and that made you dangerous to their image. Bland. When they couldn't fully destroy your career, they turned to your relationships. If they couldn't discredit you publicly, they would isolate you privately. Friendships were quietly undermined. Romantic possibilities were interfered with. Potential partners were warned away before they ever truly knew you. You were described as unstable, manipulative, or unsafe, always wrapped in concerns so convincing that no one questioned it. A reputation was built around you that had nothing to do with who you actually were. Even strangers approached you already guarded, already doubtful. Some encounters were not accidental. People were sent into your life deliberately. Introductions that felt coincidental were not. Romantic connections were encouraged that were designed to fail. They knew what kind of personalities would hurt you the most and ensured those people crossed your path. Manipulators, emotionally unstable individuals, people drawn to chaos, were placed in your orbit. When those relationships collapsed, it confirmed the story they were telling about you. From the outside, it looked like a pattern of instability. From the inside, it felt like a series of traps planned. You remember how someone would seem interested and then suddenly disappear without explanation? That wasn't random. Someone intervened. You remember being told a partner had heard things or felt uneasy without being able to explain why. That was the network at work. Quiet influence operating behind the scenes while you were left questioning yourself. Isolation made control easier, and control was always the goal. They wanted authority over how you were seen, how you were remembered, and whether you were believed. Land. For a time it worked. People who once knew you began to look at you differently. Carefully edited stories were shared, mixing truth with distortion so the lie felt believable. Screenshots were taken out of context. Private messages were reframed. Warnings were whispered. The damage didn't come from obvious lies, but from half minds. Truths that felt close enough to reality to be trusted. Slowly, allies became distant. Friends faded. Romantic connections never fully formed. Your love life became entertainment to them. Your attempts to connect were monitored, discussed, and dissected in private spaces you were never meant to see. Your heartbreak was shared as content, your pain treated like a storyline. You were no longer a person to them, but something to observe and control. Each time you began to heal, something was triggered to pull you back into chaos. The pattern repeated until exhaustion felt permanent. They didn't stop there. They went after your spirit. Faith, your sense of meaning, your connection to something greater was targeted because it was one of the few things they couldn't easily control. Your beliefs were mocked. Your practices were questioned. Your experiences were framed as delusion. They entered spaces where you should have felt safe and turned them against you. Spiritual leaders were influenced. Communities shifted. What once gave you strength became another place of exclusion. Cruelty was hidden behind moral language. Harm was justified as concern. Judgment was disguised as righteousness. You were prayed against while being told you were prayed for. Whether others believe it or not, you felt the weight of that focused intent. Directed hostility leaves an imprint, but what they did not expect was resilience. Each attack strengthened your awareness. Each attempt to sever your connection only deepened it. What was meant to break you transformed you, And then came the final wound. Even your own family began to turn. Stories were reshaped and repeated until you became the problem in your own home. You were labeled as unstable, difficult, or dangerous. Relatives, overwhelmed and unwilling to confront the truth, accepted the easier version of events. Believing the lie required less courage than questioning it. And so the manipulation completed its circle, turning the people who should have protected you into participants in your isolation.